He was a CIA agent in Cold War Berlin. She was the woman he loved, and the night he discovered his lover was a Soviet informant changed everything about trust, betrayal, and the price of deception. October 1961. The Berlin Wall had just divided the city. Michael Hayward, an American intelligence officer, met Katarina at a jazz club in the western sector. She quoted poetry. She understood his world of shadows and secrets. For 6 perfect months, she was his sanctuary from the lies he lived every day. But then came the intercepted cable from Moscow, the surveillance photos he never wanted to see, the code name that shattered his world. Swallow. She wasn't Katarina Müller from Hamburg. She was Ekaterina Volkov, trained since 17 to seduce American officers, to make them fall in love, to steal their secrets while stealing their hearts. What followed was 4 months of the cruelest game ever played between two people. Both pretending, both knowing, both trapped. Until that final night when she asked him the question that still echoes through declassified CIA files. How long have you known? Before we begin, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. These Cold War stories reach people across the world who remember this era. And if you want more hidden histories of human choices in impossible times, subscribe now. We uncover the classified stories they didn't teach in history class. Now, let's return to that smoky Berlin jazz club in 1961, where an American spy was about to meet the woman who would destroy him and discover that even in a world built entirely on lies, something real can take root in the spaces between deception. The jazz club on Kurfürstendamm was exactly the kind of place where East and West pretended to coexist in 1961 Berlin. Smoke hung thick enough to blur faces, but not intentions. American officers drank with British diplomats, French journalists scribbled notes in corners, and everyone watched everyone else while pretending to watch the stage. Michael Hayward had been in Berlin for 18 months. At 34, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who'd already seen too much. Korea had taken care of that. The CIA had recruited him straight from Yale, promising him the chance to serve his country in more sophisticated ways than carrying a rifle through frozen valleys. Now, he ran 3 assets in East Berlin, shepherding intelligence across checkpoint corridors where a wrong word could mean a bullet or worse. The saxophone was wailing through a Coltrane piece when she walked in. Even in a room full of people trained to notice everything, Katarina Müller commanded attention. Not through ostentation. She wore a simple black dress, pearl earrings, nothing flashy. It was the way she moved, deliberate but unhurried, like someone who knew exactly where she belonged. She ordered whiskey neat at the bar, speaking English with just enough German accent to sound authentic, but not enough to impede understanding. When the bartender tried to make conversation, she deflected with a quote from Rilke about autumn leaves and necessary endings. Michael, sitting 2 stools away, responded without thinking. A line from Robert Frost about promises to keep before sleeping. She turned, studied him for a moment that felt longer than it was, and smiled. An American who reads poetry. How wonderfully unexpected. By dawn, they were walking along the Spree River, the city's wounds visible in every bombed-out building, every checkpoint, every suspicious glance between strangers. She worked, she said, as a translator for the Allied Control Commission, the 4-power authority that theoretically governed Berlin. Her clearance let her move between sectors, a freedom increasingly rare as the wall grew higher each week. They talked about Sartre and Camus, about the absurdity of drawing lines through cities, through hearts. She told him about losing her parents in the Hamburg firestorm of 1943, how she'd learned English from American relief workers who'd given her chocolate and hope in equal measure. Every detail was perfect, polished, designed to create sympathy without suspicion. Michael's handler, Robert Kincaid, was delighted when he learned about the relationship 3 weeks later. Kincaid had run the Berlin station since 1958, a company man who measured success in turned assets and stolen documents. A girlfriend with Allied Commission credentials provided perfect cover for Michael's movements. She could explain his presence in sensitive areas, provide reasons for irregular schedules, become part of his operational camouflage. Just don't fall in love with her, Hayward, Kincaid warned during a briefing at the safe house on Clay Alley. These European women, they've all got complicated histories. Keep it professional. But professionalism dissolved in the face of what felt like recognition. Katarina understood the weight of secrets, the exhaustion of constant performance. She never asked where he went during his unexplained absences, never pressed for details about his work. When he returned from particularly difficult operations, a blown dead drop, an asset who'd gone dark, she'd simply pour him wine and read Pushkin in Russian, claiming her grandmother had taught her before the war. Their apartment in Charlottenburg became a sanctuary. Second floor, overlooking a courtyard where an old woman fed cats every morning at 7. The walls were lined with books in 4 languages, jazz records stacked beside a phonograph they'd bought at a flea market near Potsdamer Platz. She taught him to cook borscht the way her supposed German grandmother had made it. He introduced her to baseball through Armed Forces Radio, explaining the poetry of double plays and perfect games. Winter came early that year. By December, snow blanketed the divided city, muffling sounds, but amplifying paranoia. The wall was 4 months old, still raw and bleeding families. Every week brought new escape attempts, tunnels, hidden car compartments, forged documents. Every week brought new bodies in the death strip. Michael was running an asset codenamed Gothic, an East German economist feeding information about Soviet agricultural policies. The intelligence was good but not spectacular, the kind of steady flow that built careers without making headlines. Gothic was getting nervous, talking about defection, about bringing his family across before it was too late. It was during the planning for Gothic's potential extraction that Michael first noticed something off about Katarina. They were having dinner at a small restaurant near Checkpoint Charlie, one of those places where the proximity to the border made everyone speak in whispers. She excused herself to use the restroom, but walked past it. Out the front door. Through the frosted window, Michael watched her enter a phone booth across the street. She spoke animatedly, urgently, her breath forming clouds in the December air. When she returned 10 minutes later, she claimed nausea, suggested they leave. But in that phone booth, in the moment before she'd turned away from the street, Michael had seen her lips forming words, Russian words, not German. That night, she slept fitfully. Her usual stillness, she typically slept like someone trained to leave no impression, gave way to restless movement. She murmured names, Volkov, Dmitri, Stalingrad. When he touched her shoulder, she startled awake, eyes wide with fear that seemed too genuine to be performance. Bad dream, she whispered, pressing against him. Sometimes I dream in Russian. My grandmother's language. It happens when I'm worried. The explanation was plausible. Many Germans had Russian somewhere in their past, especially those from the East. But Michael's operational mind had already begun its terrible arithmetic, cataloging details he dismissed as quirks. The way she held her knife and fork in the continental style, but sometimes forgot, reverting to the Russian manner. Her supposed favorite German childhood lullaby that she hummed with a melody he'd heard in a Soviet cultural film. The gaps in her Hamburg story that she covered with tears about trauma, about memories too painful to revisit. He began his investigation carefully, using resources that wouldn't trigger alerts. Her employment file at the commission was perfect. Too perfect. Every reference checked out, every date aligned, but there was a quality of construction to it, like a house built to code, but lacking the irregularities of real life. Michael Hayward had been trained to live with suspicion the way other men lived with chronic pain, constantly present, but manageable if you didn't focus on it too directly. But suspicion about Katarina was different. It metastasized through every memory, poisoning moments he'd treasured. He started with the photographs. The CIA maintained extensive files on Soviet personnel in Berlin. Faces captured at diplomatic functions, trade missions, cultural exchanges. Michael spent hours in the secure room at Clay Alley, studying images under fluorescent lights that made everyone look guilty. He found her on his 3rd day of searching. Younger, hair differently styled, but unmistakably Katarina. She was standing behind a Soviet trade delegate at a 1959 reception, identified only as unknown female, possible administrative staff. The next piece came from signals intelligence. NSA intercepted thousands of communications daily, most of them mundane, but Michael had friends in the cryptography section. They ran her name through their databases. Nothing. Then he tried variations, diminutives, patronymics. On Ekaterina, they got a hit. A series of coded messages referencing Agent Swallow, active in West Berlin since 1958, assigned to harvest American intelligence personnel. The final confirmation arrived in a cable from Moscow Center that NSA had decoded 2 weeks earlier, but hadn't yet fully analyzed. Swallow continues productive relationship with Harvard. Maintain current operational tempo. Secondary targets identified for future cultivation. Michael sat in the empty briefing room, staring at the decoded text until the words blurred. Harvard was him, a mocking reference to his Yale education that the Soviets must have found amusing. Productive relationship. Everything reduced to operational terms. Their intimacy transformed into metrics for some KGB file. He drove home that night through empty streets, past checkpoints where young soldiers stamped their feet against the cold. The apartment was warm, smelling of paprika and onions. Katarina was cooking goulash, wearing his Columbia University sweatshirt, hair pinned up with a pencil. She smiled when he entered, and he kissed her like nothing had changed, tasting the lie on her lips. "You're late," she said, stirring the pot. "Rough day?" "The usual," he replied, pouring himself 3 fingers of bourbon instead of his usual 2. They ate dinner discussing a French film playing at the cinema on Kantstrasse. She laughed at his attempt to pronounce the director's name, corrected him gently, suggested they go Saturday evening. Michael agreed, knowing that by Saturday, everything would be different. That night, he watched her sleep. In repose, her face lost its careful composition. She looked younger, vulnerable, almost innocent. He thought about their first night together. How she'd trembled when he touched her. How she'd whispered his name like a prayer or confession. Had that been performance? 2? Was there a manual somewhere in Moscow that taught agents how to simulate passion? How to fake the particular intake of breath that suggested surrender? Kincaid called him in the next morning. The station chief's office was a windowless cube decorated with commendations and a single photograph of his family back in Virginia. He gestured for Michael to sit, poured coffee from a thermos, and laid out a series of surveillance photographs like tarot cards, revealing a terrible future. "We've been watching her for a week," Kincaid said. "These were taken yesterday. The images showed Katarina at Treptower Park, feeding ducks at the pond. A man joined her on the bench. Viktor Kozlov, known GRU operative working under commercial cover. They didn't touch, barely looked at each other, but Katarina dropped a small package that Kozlov retrieved when he left. Classic brush pass, executed with professional precision. "She's good," Kincaid continued, almost admiringly. 3 years of prep work before she made contact with you. We've identified at least 11 other American personnel she assessed before selecting you as primary target." "Why me?" Michael heard himself ask. "Your profile. Single, intellectual, emotionally isolated. You read poetry, for Christ's sake. You were perfect for her approach. The Soviets call it a honey trap, though this one was more sophisticated than most. Long-term, deep cover, designed to create genuine emotional dependency." Kincaid outlined the options with bureaucratic detachment. Michael could break contact immediately, accept reassignment to another station. The agency would handle Katarina quietly, either turning her or trading her. Or, and here Kincaid leaned forward, Michael could continue the relationship as a double game. Feed her disinformation. Use her channel to poison Soviet intelligence streams. Turn your personal disaster into operational gold. Kincaid's smile was thin, reptilian. Think of it as method acting. You know the truth now, but she doesn't know you know. That's leverage. Michael thought of Katarina that morning, humming in the shower, leaving lipstick traces on his coffee cup, existing in the fiction that she was loved by a man who didn't know she was destroying him. The cruelty of the proposed deception was breathtaking. To pretend to be fooled while she pretended to love. Layers of performance that would eventually collapse into mutual annihilation. "I'll do it," he said. Living with knowledge of betrayal while performing ignorance required a kind of psychological splitting that Michael hadn't learned at Camp Peary. Every morning, he woke beside Katarina and chose his mask for the day. Devoted lover. Unsuspecting fool. Man too blinded by affection to see the obvious. He kissed her goodbye at breakfast, tasting deception like copper pennies on his tongue. He brought her flowers from the market on Winterfeldplatz, selecting roses while imagining her reporting their conversations to her handler. He made love to her with desperate intensity that she mistook for passion, but was actually grief. Mourning something that had never existed. The CIA's plan was elegant in its simplicity. Michael would feed Katarina intelligence that seemed valuable, but was actually poisoned. True enough to maintain her credibility with Moscow. False enough to protect American assets. They called it a chicken feed operation, though nothing about it felt as harmless as the name suggested. The first test came in April 1962. Katarina, during what seemed like casual pillow talk, mentioned hearing rumors about American intelligence networks in Dresden. "The interpreters gossip," she said, tracing circles on his chest. "They say you Americans are very active there." Michael pretended to tense, then forced himself to relax. "You shouldn't listen to gossip," he said, pulling her closer. But the next day, he left carefully prepared documents on his desk while showering. Reports about a fabricated network of assets in Dresden, complete with code names and dead drop locations. Through the bathroom mirror's gap, he watched her photograph them with a miniature Minox camera extracted from her lipstick case. The false intelligence worked its way through Soviet channels. Within 3 weeks, the KGB was chasing ghosts in Dresden, surveilling innocent citizens Michael had randomly selected from phone directories, wasting resources on non-existent dead drops. Kincaid was ecstatic. Moscow Center, believing they had a gold mine, increased Katarina's taskings. But the psychological toll was corrosive. Michael started drinking heavily. Bourbon for breakfast, vodka for irony. He found himself studying Katarina for signs of genuine emotion, searching for cracks in her performance. Sometimes he thought he found them. A moment of hesitation before she asked probing questions. A flash of something like guilt when he mentioned children they might have someday. The way she clung to him during thunderstorms, which seemed too primal to be scripted. One evening in May, she cooked beef stroganoff, a Russian dish she'd never made before. After 2 bottles of wine, she began telling him about winters in Stalingrad, about her mother's hands cracked from cold, about eating wallpaper paste when the flour ran out. She caught herself, tried to retreat into her Hamburg cover story, but the damage was done. They both knew she'd revealed something true. "My grandmother," she said weakly. She was from Stalingrad originally, before she moved to Hamburg. Michael nodded, playing along, while filing away this glimpse beneath her mask. That night, she cried in her sleep. Not delicate tears, but raw, gulping sobs that seemed to come from some deep well of sorrow. He held her, wondering if comfort given in deception could ever be real. If love performed perfectly, became indistinguishable from love itself. By July, the stress was visible on both of them. Katarina lost weight, her cheekbones sharpening into Slavic prominence she could no longer soften with makeup. She started making mistakes, speaking Russian to a taxi driver, flinching when someone knocked loudly at their door, once calling him Mikhail instead of Michael. Michael's own performance was fracturing. During a dead drop operation in Kreuzberg, he nearly broke. Almost confronted her with everything he knew. They were walking past a demolished church, its skeleton still reaching toward heaven, when she took his hand and said, "Sometimes I wish we could just disappear. Go somewhere where the past doesn't matter." "Where would we go?" he asked, his voice rougher than intended. "Maybe Argentina," she said. "I hear Buenos Aires is beautiful. We could be different people there." The irony was excruciating. They were already different people, already disappeared into fabricated selves. Argentina would just be another stage for the same performance. August brought the crisis. Moscow Center, perhaps suspicious of the intelligence she was providing, demanded she obtain specific documents. Operational plans for American assets in East Germany. The request was a test. If she succeeded, she'd prove her continued value. If she failed, she'd be recalled to Moscow for consultation, a euphemism that usually preceded execution or exile to the Gulag. Michael knew about the demand through intercepted communications. Kincaid saw it as an opportunity to deliver a decisive blow. They would provide documents exposing a network of Soviet double agents the CIA had already identified but not yet burned. The Soviets would eliminate their own assets, doing the CIA's wet work for them. The moral calculation sickened Michael, but he prepared the documents anyway, leaving them in his desk's locked drawer with a key she'd long ago duplicated. Michael lay in bed that August night, feigning sleep with the practiced stillness he'd perfected over months of deception. Through barely parted eyelids, he watched Katarina slip from beneath the covers at 3 a.m. She moved like liquid shadow, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor. Every movement was choreographed, rehearsed, professional. She retrieved the copied key from its hiding place inside a hollowed-out book of Goethe's poetry, a detail that would have been poetic if it weren't so calculated. The desk drawer opened with the faintest whisper. He heard the subtle click of her camera, saw the brief illumination of its tiny flash against the wall. She photographed each page methodically, checking twice to ensure clarity. When she returned to bed, her skin was cold, heart racing beneath his palm as he pulled her close in pretended sleep. They lay there, two people touching everywhere and nowhere, each trapped in their own deception, each wondering if the other could feel the weight of unspoken truth, pressing down like water at depth. The next morning, she made his favorite breakfast: eggs over easy, black bread with butter, strong coffee with a splash of cream. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured, the only sign of what she'd done hours before. They discussed weekend plans, a trip to Wannsee for swimming, as if they were any ordinary couple planning any ordinary future. 2 weeks later, the consequences arrived in intercepted Soviet communications. 3 double agents in East Berlin, men the KGB believed were loyal, but who'd actually been selling secrets to the CIA, were arrested at dawn. By noon, they were on a flight to Moscow. By evening, according to Signals Intelligence, they were dead in the basement of Lubyanka, shot in the back of the head with the clinical efficiency the Soviets reserved for traitors. Katarina received the news through a coded message hidden in a library book. Michael watched her read it at their kitchen table, saw the color drain from her face, the way her fingers pressed white against the paper. She burned the message in the sink, watching it curl into ash, then vomited into the same basin. Food poisoning, she told him, accepting the glass of water he offered. But her eyes held something else. Horror, perhaps, or recognition of what she'd become. That night, she was scheduled to meet her handler at a safe house in Neukölln. Michael knew because the CIA had the place wired, had been listening to these meetings for weeks. He followed her through the rain-slicked streets, maintaining professional distance, watching her check for surveillance with moves he'd taught her, thinking she was teaching him to recognize when he was being followed. At the safe house, Viktor Kozlov was waiting with vodka and questions. The conversation, transmitted to Michael through his earpiece, was conducted entirely in Russian. Even without perfect fluency, he understood enough. Kozlov was suspicious. The intelligence she'd provided had been too good, too convenient. Moscow Center wanted her to take things further, to propose marriage to Michael, to push for access to the Berlin station itself. "He loves me," Katarina said in Russian, her voice flat. "He'll do whatever I ask." "Good," Kozlov replied. "Love is the most effective weapon we have. Use it." There was a long pause. Then Katarina asked, "What happens to him when this is over?" "That's not your concern. Your concern is the intelligence he provides." "I need to know." Another pause. The sound of vodka being poured. "He'll be traded eventually, or turned, or eliminated, depending on his value." "Why? Don't tell me you've developed feelings for the target." "No," she said too quickly. "I'm just calculating variables. It affects how I proceed." Michael removed his earpiece, unable to listen further. He walked back to their apartment through empty streets, past buildings still scarred from bombs dropped nearly 2 decades ago. The city carried its wounds openly, honestly. Only the people hid their damage beneath careful surfaces. When Katarina returned, she found him reading in their living room, a glass of bourbon sweating on the side table. She kissed his forehead, fingers running through his hair with what felt like genuine tenderness. "Working late?" he asked. "Translation emergency. Some trade delegation crisis." The lie came so easily, so naturally. "You should sleep. You look tired." "In a bit. How was your evening?" She sat beside him, curling against his shoulder with the comfort of long intimacy. "Lonely," she said. "It's always lonely when I'm not with you." The words hung between them. Perhaps the truest thing she'd said in months. Or perhaps just another performance, calibrated to increase his emotional dependency. The inability to distinguish between the two was driving Michael toward a breaking point he could feel approaching like weather. 3 days later, Kincaid delivered the news that would shatter their elaborate fiction. Moscow Center had ordered Katarina's immediate extraction. Someone, somewhere, had connected enough dots to realize she might be compromised. "We're taking her tomorrow night," Kincaid said. "You have 36 hours. Michael stood in the doorway of their apartment, watching Katarina burn photographs in the kitchen sink. Not operational materials. Those had already been destroyed or hidden. These were personal pictures. Their trip to Paris in the spring, when they'd kissed beneath the Eiffel Tower like tourists. A candid moment at a cafe in Charlottenburg, her laughing at something he'd said, completely unguarded. The vacation in Bavaria, standing beside the Königssee, its water so clear you could see straight to the bottom. She turned when she heard him, mascara streaming down her cheeks in black rivers. For a moment, they just looked at each other across the small kitchen. Two people who knew everything and nothing about each other. "How long have you known?" she asked in perfect, unaccented English, the final mask falling away. "Since March," he replied. She nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something she'd suspected. "And you continued anyway?" "Yes." "Feeding me false intelligence, playing me the way I was playing you?" "Yes." She laughed, bitter and broken. "We're perfect for each other. Two professional liars who fell into something neither of us can name." The arrest team would arrive at 4 a.m. Michael had 12 hours to say goodbye to someone who had never really existed, or perhaps existed too much. He poured 2 glasses of bourbon, handed her one, and they sat at their small table where they'd shared hundreds of meals, each one a performance that had somehow become real through repetition. "My name is Ekaterina Alexandrovna Volkov," she said. "My father is GRU Colonel Alexander Volkov. I was recruited at 17, trained for 5 years, inserted into Berlin in 1958. I've been watching you since you arrived. Every moment between us was planned, scripted, reported." "I know," Michael said. "But here's what you don't know." She took a shaking breath. "I was supposed to seduce you and move on. 6 months maximum, then on to the next target. But I couldn't. I asked for extensions, made excuses. Told Moscow you were proving difficult to crack, that I needed more time. Why?" She studied her bourbon as if it held answers. "Because something happened that wasn't in any manual. I fell in love with my target. The real kind. The kind that makes you stupid and reckless and human." Michael wanted to believe her, needed to believe her, but trust had become impossible. Every word could be another manipulation. Every tear, another weapon. This could be her final operation, making him believe in love to destroy his ability to ever trust again. "The 3 agents who were executed," he said. "You killed them." "Yes." No hesitation, no excuse. "And you let me. You gave me those documents knowing what would happen. They were double agents. Traitors to their own country. Like me. Like both of us." They sat in silence as the city settled into night around them. Somewhere, a dog barked. A siren wailed in the distance. The ordinary sounds of a world that would continue spinning after they were both gone, traded or imprisoned, or disappeared into new identities. "I need you to know something," Katarina said. "October through March, before you knew, that was real. The first real thing I'd felt since they took me at 17 and taught me to be a weapon. When we talked about poetry, when we cooked together, when we made love. I wasn't Katarina the spy. I was just Katya, a girl from Stalingrad who somehow found herself loving a boy from Connecticut. How can I believe anything you say? You can't. That's what we've done to each other. Made belief impossible. She reached across the table, took his hand. But maybe that's the most honest thing about us. We know exactly who we are. Two people who weaponized love and got caught in our own crossfire. At 3:30 in the morning, she dressed carefully in the clothes she'd arrived in. A simple black dress, pearl earrings, as if preparing to leave the same way she'd entered his life. She'd written something, 3 pages in careful handwriting, and left it on the table. "It's not intelligence," she said. "It's just truth, what little of it I have left to give." When the CIA team arrived, Michael opened the door himself. Katarina sat at the table, hands folded, dignified in defeat. As they led her away, she stopped at the threshold. In Russian, she quoted Akhmatova. "I have learned how faces fall apart, how terror looks from beneath eyelids." Michael responded in English with Elliot. "These fragments I have shored against my ruins." She smiled, the saddest smile he'd ever seen. They'd built something from the wreckage. Not love, perhaps, but recognition. Two people who'd seen beneath each other's masks and found matching wounds. Michael never saw her again. But 29 years later, when the Soviet Union collapsed and the walls came down, all of them, physical and metaphorical, a letter arrived. Inside, a ticket stub from a Berlin jazz club, October 1961, and 5 words: "The only true thing, E."